All right, so we are here today with Carla. She's one of my providers that does a great job with this, and today we're going to explain a little bit about depression. And so if you're one of the patients that's coming to watch this video, you're about to learn a little more about depression and what's going on than most people know. What I find is most people come into a mental health provider and we simply treat the symptoms, but they don't really get to understand what's causing those symptoms and why is the treatment that you're suggesting going to actually treat that cause that we're dealing with. So today, Carla and I are going to talk through that, and you guys all get to be part of that and you get to learn from it. So first off, we need to understand what is depression. And to understand depression, we have to understand how the body regulates. Now, your brain is a collection of neurons or nerves. The scientific name for a nerve is a neuron. And so as you have your brain here, you're looking at it and you have all of these neurons in your head together, and they all cooperate together to form thoughts and behaviors and different coping mechanisms, and anything you do, it happens with those neurons talking with each other. Now, there's two major important parts in the brain. There are many parts, but when it comes to mental health, there's going to be two major parts. The one is your frontal lobe, right here in the front of the brain. And what that is that's the collection of neurons that generally controls everything that you are aware of. It is, in other words, your conscious mind. And so when you think of the conscious mind, for all intents and purposes, it's this frontal lobe right up here. That's what makes you human. You figure a dog has a frontal lobe about the size of, I don't know, a ping pong ball. And that's why when a dog smells meat, it goes running. When a human smells meat, we look over and say, hot dog, that's a hamburger joint. Do I want to go in and get a hamburger? Or is there dinner waiting for me at home? Do I have enough money to pay for it? Notice how you start doing analysis. Dogs don't do analysis. That's because they only have that ping pong ball sized frontal lobe. And so to understand depression, we have to understand what the frontal lobe does. The frontal lobe is the part of your brain that actually controls your mood. Meaning, when something good happens, I can enjoy that. When something bad happens, I can work through it and get over that. Notice how if that's not working, we have a depression. It also controls anxiety. Meaning, I can experience stressors in my life without becoming overwhelmed. I can tolerate and work through that. It does our major functions in our sleep regulation, meaning when I'm tired, I can actually fall asleep. And if I need the rest, I can actually stay asleep. It does memory, concentration. It does actual energy and strength. Most people aren't aware the frontal lobe is actually where the little energy generator that starts the electrical impulse that then eventually comes down the nerve and into your muscle, and it says, hey, activate this many muscle fibers. Well, if you have a sick frontal lobe and it's not working well and it only generates half of the electrical current that it should, you're only going to activate half of those muscles. So how heavy is something you're lifting going to feel when you're only using half of your muscle? So actual energy and strength also come from the frontal lobe. And so when we look at this, understanding that the frontal lobe is what controls our mood regulation allows us to understand what causes it. There are many things that can cause your frontal lobe to not be at its best, but one of the easiest ways to understand it is if somebody says you are diagnosed with depression, what they're actually saying is your frontal lobe is not functioning at its best. It's only, let's use a made-up one, it's only functioning at 50% of capacity. And so any interventions we do should be interventions that reactivate the frontal lobe. And so that's where many people start to wonder, and they get to the point that they say, well, what's the best treatment? Well, there are many things that can do it. First off, medical conditions. Some of your hormones, if they are off, the neurons cannot be healthy. Therefore, they can't function normally. Therefore, you're going to struggle with depression and anxiety and memory and all those things that the frontal lobe does. A simple one that many people understand is thyroid. If your thyroid is off, for some reason, that really affects the neurons in your entire body, to include those in the frontal lobe. And so the first thing we look at is, do they have any medical conditions that might be causing the frontal lobe to not function well? And that's why we want to have a doctor diagnose that. And second thing that can do it is stress. Most people don't realize if you're under stress and don't know how to solve a problem, that causes cortisol to be released. Cortisol in the short term is really healthy. It allows our neurons to actually function and then rest, and function and rest. Think of it this way. When you're ultimately stressed, if you didn't have cortisol, you would actually be paralyzed and be unable to function. That's actually, if you've ever seen the videos of the fainting goats that they have, those fainting goats don't have cortisol. And that's why when they're scared, they're startled, they actually paralyzed and will fall over sideways. That would happen to us. So cortisol is very helpful in the short term. It's what allows us to endure incredible stress and not become paralyzed. But it's meant to be on, and then I'm off with a break. And I'm on, and I'm off with a break. So I would never want to eliminate cortisol, but I wouldn't want to have it on all the time either. And that's what causes that to happen. And so in those cases, we would start to look and say, why is the cortisol on all the time? Sometimes it's a psychological stressor, we don't know what to do. So in those cases, guess what the best treatment is?
Solving the problem.
Solving the problem. And many times that's through therapy to help us identify ways. So medical, psychological, and then lastly, sometimes some people's frontal lobe gets so sick that it can't quite start healing on its own. It needs a jump start. And that's where psychiatric medications come in. Now, early in the day, most people say, oh, that makes sense, antidepressants. Early in the day, we didn't understand how antidepressants work. In fact, the first antidepressant actually came out of trying to treat tuberculosis. Most people don't understand. Tuberculosis is a bacteria. Now, unlike many of the viruses and bacteria, tuberculosis can float in the air. And what that means is, if you go in the same room where somebody with tuberculosis has been breathing, you can be infected just by breathing in the same room as there. It doesn't take spit droplets or anything else. Tuberculosis is very simple. It is very, very hungry. It wants oxygen and it wants nutrients. And it can't get it up on its own. It must steal that from the blood of whatever animal it lands on. And so it's not that it wants to harm you, it's just hungry. And so what do we see when people breathe it in? It tries to get into the blood vessels where it can get oxygen and nutrients. The problem is that destroys your lungs. That's why in the old cowboy films you'd see the tuberculosis and people would cough and there would be a little blood on the rag. That's what it was. And so the only way before we had antibiotics that would kill this very, very nasty and strong bacteria was we'd put the people into their own homes where once you're infected, you're infected. So it was only people with tuberculosis living in these large buildings called sanatoriums. And they're beautiful, nice buildings. Well, a lot of research happened in these sanatoriums. And they actually went in there and they said, we have these penicillins and these antibiotics that we know, think of the 1940s and 1950s, and there's this new one we want to experiment to see if it will help. Is there anybody willing to participate in our experiment? And of course these people said, this is a death sentence. I'm terminal if I don't do it. I'll participate in your experiment. Please, I'm going to be gone either way, so I might as well take a chance and see if this could help me. And so the first one was called iproniazid. And what they did is they brought it in and they had a group of people who they gave the regular penicillins to and a group that got the iproniazid. And they studied it and they found that iproniazid was no better than the regular penicillins at helping to kill tuberculosis. But they noticed a strange difference. They said, but all of the ones who got this experimental drug, they're actually happy and they're remembering better and it takes a bigger stressor to make them anxious. What is it? It's like their depression went away. And so the scientists immediately said, what could we call this brand new medicine? And they said, well, it's like it's the anti to depression. Let's call it an antidepressant. and it was the first type of antidepressant we have, called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And we don't use it today because what we discovered was a couple of years after taking it, people had liver failure and it killed them. And so today they're much safer, much cleaner, much more effective antidepressants. But that's where the name antidepressant actually comes from. What we know today is, many of you are watching this video because you have been prescribed an antidepressant and you're saying, I want to know now. You prescribed it, Carla or Dr. Watson, and there must be a good reason, and it is because antidepressants, if we got to rename them, because back in the day they didn't have an idea why they helped depression. It was as if magically it helped the mood. Now we understand enough science and enough neurobiology and neuroanatomy to understand they're restoring the function in the frontal lobe. So if I got to rename them, I wouldn't call them antidepressants, I would call them frontal lobe strengtheners, because they jumpstart the healing process. Now they can't do it all, but it is kind of like jump-starting your car, getting it going again so that the healing can begin. And that's actually why we give antidepressants, is to jump-start the neurons to start healing. And that's how they work. Now, antidepressants work in some interesting ways. Your neurons, you have to understand that each neuron has a function. And since neurons can't use voice waves to talk like we are here, they have to communicate using something else. So the only communication they have available to them, they can't write notes and pass notes. They can't speak. They don't have a mouth and ears. It takes a body to have those. So instead, they actually send chemical message to each other. And so what did the scientists give these special chemicals that send messages to each other? A name. That name is hormone. A hormone is nothing more than a communication between a neuron and another tissue. That could be one neuron talking to another neuron. It could be one neuron talking to a bone cell or a muscle cell, or even another type of tissue that makes a different hormone. And so they do this. In mental health, there are three main, there are others, thousands of hormones, but there are three big ones that really keep neuron health, especially in your frontal lobe and the rest of the brain. And those are serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Each neuron has two important parts with these hormones. They have a big storage tank where they have all these hormones. There will be a serotonin tank, and another neuron will have a norepinephrine tank, and another one will have a dopamine tank, and they do various things. But the way they work is, you figure this, picture it this way. Now we're simplifying some of these into calling it a tank for you to be able to visualize this. So they have this big tank, and it's actually thousands of little vacuoles, they're called, but think of it as a tank, and when it needs, it says 3 serotonins to communicate that we're happy. And so think of the neuron goes pew, 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 and shoots out 3 of these, and why it makes the pew sound, I don't know, but in my mind, it makes a pew sound. And so it shoots it out, and another neuron receives it. Hey, we just got the 3 serotonin thing. Go ahead and activate, send an electrical impulse down there. We're happy. And there you're happy. Or we need to remember this, or all these things. And then the second thing that happens is our body realizes it takes a lot of energy to put together all these amino acids and proteins to make a single hormone. It's a lot of energy to create one hormone. And so the body realizes these aren't one-time uses. You can use a serotonin and then pick it up and put it back in the recycle bin, or the storage bin, excuse me. That recycling arm picks it up and puts it back, and I can use it again. That way I'm not using nearly as much energy to make new proteins. And so when you realize the storage tank and the recycling arm, these are the big things. And so what happens is, for some reason, now this part science hasn't discovered yet. We don't know why, but for some reason, when neurons get sick, if we slow down how quickly that recycling arm recycles those hormones, it causes healing. We don't know why. We know that it happens, but why? Who knows? Science hasn't told me, and so I can't tell you either. But what happens then is all of our antidepressants that we use today, there are a few of the old ones, but you know what they do? They're actually just recycling arm slowers. And so these special recycling arms were given a scientific name. They're called reuptake enzymes. But you can think of them as a recycling arm. So if you are having symptoms that tend to be serotonin regulated symptoms, meaning they aren't working so well, things such as my mood, my anxiety, many times you need something that slows down that serotonin recycling arm so that the serotonin neurons start to heal. If you're struggling with concentration and memory, that tends to be a little more norepinephrine and some dopamine. If you're struggling with focus, with energy, once again, that's dopamine and norepinephrine. So you can see there's some different mixes in there, and your provider has likely identified in you which ones you have. And so if you are struggling mostly with serotonin syndromes, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you a medicine that slows down the serotonin recycling arm so that the serotonin nerves heal in your brain. If it's dopamine and norepinephrine, I'm going to give you one that slows down those recycling arms. And that's literally how depression works and why we choose antidepressants, because they strengthen the frontal lobe. And some of you may be now thinking, why then does he give these antidepressants for anxiety? Because the same frontal lobe that does mood regulation, did you catch it earlier? Also does anxiety tolerance. And so that's actually long-term the best anxiety medication is getting the neurons strong again so that you can function. And so as you guys are prescribed an antidepressant, that's why we prescribe antidepressants. And that's what we're actually treating. And so I hope this helps you all so that you all can understand why that was the best medicine for you. And hopefully things keep going well for you. Thanks for your time. I hope you've enjoyed this video that gives a general understanding of this topic. However, I recognize that some people want to have a much deeper understanding. I get individuals who want to understand the neurology, the physiology, or even the psychology of what's going on here. They further want to understand how the medications will affect each of these items. The good news is that that's available. There are 3 different ways that people obtain a deeper understanding of this topic. The first way that people do this is they book an appointment with Dr. Watson where they can receive individualized training as well as treatment. The second way that people obtain a deeper understanding is that they attend one of the seminars that Dr. Watson puts on. These seminars happen around the nation and people enjoy learning in a group atmosphere where they can deepen their understanding of what's happening in their specific situation. The last way that a deeper understanding has been made available are via online seminars. Dr. Watson has produced and continues to produce online seminars that cost about 20% of what it would cost to attend one of his nationwide seminars, as well as much less than what it would cost to attend individual sessions with him. So if you're interested in learning more and obtaining a deeper understanding of what's causing your problems so that you can overcome this once and for all, there are 3 different options there. We hope that one of them will work for you.